What questions do y'all have for me? Anything at all? Real quick, while I'm waiting for questions, let me put in a plug for Mariah's stream tomorrow about student government, and if it's for you, she's very familiar with student government, so I highly recommend attending that. But any other questions you guys have? So when I'll share some anecdotes while I'm here waiting for questions, but while I was tutoring people, private tutoring people for the SAT and ACT, one thing I realized was that people often relied on the tutor to kind of tell them what to do. And I think that's the issue with any sort of test prep course. You know, you're relying too much on someone else telling you what to do and what to focus on, rather than you actually realizing where you are and what you need to fix. I think that realization and, you actually reflecting on what you're struggling with is going to help you get to where you want to be faster, rather than someone just telling you to study like these chapters and these concepts. So, even if you do take a test prep course and you realize that's the route you want to go, just like, keep yourself accountable, and reflect on how much progress you're actually making. Don't rely too much on the tutor or the teacher to tell you what to do. I see a question about how many hours should you study during the school year for the SAT? Okay, so say you're studying maybe fall semester of your junior year, just because, that's like kind of leading up to maybe the December exam, which is what you want to take. So junior year for most people is very intense. You've got a lot of different, like pretty intense classes, sometimes quite a few AP and IB classes in your schedule. I would say it's realistic to say maybe like 1 to 2 hours of studying a day. I wouldn't schedule any practice exams for the evenings after your school day, just because, you after going through 8 hours of school and then coming back to take like a 4-hour exam, that's definitely not fun. And it's also not going to be representative because you're taking the test in the evening, and normally these tests are during the day, earlier in the morning, like 8 a.m., 9 a.m. So I would say maybe 1 to 2 hours during the week. And then when it comes around to the weekend, maybe try to be flexible with your weekends. So say like, you'll try to take an SAT or ACT practice test every other weekend, but be flexible with yourself to the point where, if you're taking a lot of AP or IB classes and you have a huge test coming up that was something you didn't really plan for, be able to dedicate your weekend to that and still be okay with your SAT or ACT schedule kind of moving around or shifting around, if that makes sense. So be flexible with yourself. But I think during the school year, it's harder to plan around everything because, projects could come up, a pop quiz. I don't know, you can't really plan for a pop quiz, but like things could come up where you realize like you need to put more time into your academics, and you definitely don't want your grades and your classes dropping as a result of studying for the SAT or ACT, because that is just equally as important. But during the weekends, I think you could dedicate maybe like 3 to 4 hours of studying, and one of those days at least should be practice test day, and then the next day should be reviewing. And one big thing to emphasize, for a lot of people actually, and for me included, reviewing the exam usually will take much longer than taking the exam, just because you're trying to identify the root cause of your mistake or like, whatever you're struggling with. So be okay with setting aside maybe more than 4 hours to actually review the exam. That was slightly off topic, but yeah. I think it's reasonable to say 1 to 2 hours during the weekdays, and then maybe 3 to 4 hours during the weekends, which could definitely put you on track for the score you want to receive, with like starting in like August all the way up until like December when you might want to take the test. I see a question about what prep books would you recommend? 5 Steps, Barron's, Princeton Review, etc. I think the main one I would recommend for the ACT at least would be the ACT official guide. Let me see if I can link it actually. That's actually by the ACT people, and it's going to be the most representative in terms of like practice tests. It's this one. I'll put it in the chat for the ACT. I don't think the SAT has anything like that. I think any resources you find on the College Board website will be the most helpful first. There seems to be an official SAT study guide as well. So search that up as well, which is by the College Board. Yeah, so I would recommend that as well. But any resources from them will be the best first. But if you are trying to save those official practice exams like later in your study, you know, maybe closer to your test date, which is what I recommend, I would say any of the third-party resources will be fine. I've heard great things about Barron's ACT specifically. I'm not sure too much about SAT, but I know 5 Steps is also great. I think Kaplan and Princeton Review are good, but their scores, just like the Barron's and 5 Steps though, will be kind of deflated because they will be harder than the real thing usually. But I've heard great things about Barron's. Yeah, I'm trying to see if there's anything else. You should be able to find a lot of SAT prep resources on the Khan Academy website though, for completely free, which is great. There's a lot of great free resources out there, so don't feel like you have to get the prep books in order to do well. But if you are planning on buying the test prep books, you don't have to. One big thing I recommend, which is something I didn't realize back when I was taking the exam, was that you don't need to get the most updated version, like the most recent edition of it, because those happen to be a lot more expensive, and usually a lot doesn't change from edition to edition unless the test changes drastically, which it hasn't recently, except for the removal of the SAT, the essay portion of it. But other than that, it's pretty standard. So if you want to go for an older version, it'll be much more affordable. I do recommend checking out half price books because they have them for much, much cheaper than the original price. I see a question about, can you get like a 1530 with 3 months worth of practice without schoolwork involved? I would say yes, but it depends on where you're starting. If you're starting at maybe a 1200, I think, maybe a 1300, I think that'd be possible. I think 3 months of worth of practice with nothing else involved is a lot of time. But you have to be realistic with yourself. How much time are you going to really be putting in during those days to study? Because you'll definitely get burnt out if you study like 6 hours a day. So if you are going to be doing that, say this is like during the summer, make sure to also incorporate rest days into your schedule. So say you'll take off like every Friday, you're just going to take off, which is okay. It's okay to not study a couple of days here and there because you need that time to rest and recover and rejuvenate. So I think it is possible to get a 1530 though in 3 months of work, but it does really depend on where you're starting. If you're starting below 1000, I think it could be a little more difficult because if you're starting below that point, I think it's indicating that you have a lot of gaps in knowledge, like actual content. So it might require more time to actually study that material and get a good understanding of it. But if you're above that point, I think maybe in like the 1100, 1200 range, you have a pretty decent understanding, at least a foundation of most of the concepts. I think beyond that point, it's really just going to be that test prep strategies. So like, keeping your mind active for 4 hours and being able to answer those specific SAT and ACT style questions because they do like to ask them in a particular way. So getting familiar with that style, getting familiar with the questions, being able to quickly point out like, that's obviously a wrong answer. That's obviously something they don't want you to pick. Those types of strategies I think are going to be more useful after that point, which can be done with 3 months worth of practice. But anything below the 1000, I think you might need a little bit more time. But it's still possible. I think if you put in a lot of hours, which you still got to be realistic with yourself, but it is possible. Just really depends on how strict you are with yourself and if you actually do set up a good study plan. What other questions do y'all have for me? We have a little bit of time left. So any other questions, drop them in the chat. Let me see if there's anything else I'm forgetting to mention that would be important. Oh, I see questions. Okay. Okay. Hi, Shravya. Hi. What is your recommendation on gaps between each test? Say if I get a great super score with SAT, is it really needed to write the ACT as well? I'm a junior this fall and I'm planning my first SAT this December. I'm giving myself this summer through November as a prep. Okay, first of all, I love how you're giving yourself up until, during the whole summer to prep, as well as like, through November, which means like partway through the school year. That is a lot of time. So that's great. You seem like you're going to be able to tackle all of that in the amount of time you have. You're a junior, so you're taking your first SAT in December, which is the fall of your junior year, which is perfect timing. If you get a great super score, so you're saying you'll take the SAT maybe multiple times, more than once, and you're hoping that your super score is good, which is great. you don't need to take the ACT in that case. I think it's a common misconception, or like people like to think that, you need to take both exams, or like, schools are going to want to see both scores and you excelling in both things. That's totally not true. If you have one good standardized test score on your application, that is more than enough. Other than that, I would say focus your time and energy on extracurriculars, leadership positions, just things that are meaningful to you that you would be able to write about in essays. So please don't go prepping for another standardized exam. Once you're done and you get a good SAT score, just put it aside. It should just be a box you check off, and then move on to actually fruitful things that'll add on to your application. Because I've said this so many times, but like the SAT, ACT, or your like GPA, all those are kind of just going to get you to the door. And what gets you through the door for college admissions is going to be your extracurriculars and things that you've done that are important to you and that actually have like contributed to your whole experience and contributed to who you are. So those are things you're going to be writing about in your activities list or in your essays, and you want enough of those, and you're only going to get enough of those if you have time for them. So once you're done with the SAT, ACT stuff, don't feel like you need to take another test. You can just check that off and then move on to actually fun things, because I don't think a lot of you would count studying for the SAT or ACT as fun. Yeah, it's not. So yeah, don't need to take the ACT as well. What is your recommendation on gaps between each test? If you're asking like if you're taking time off and you're coming back to like do a retake, that's completely okay. That is what I did when I was taking the ACT. I took it December of my junior year, and then I came back a year later, like 9 months later, September, October of my senior year. And that was okay. I think it's just, do you feel like there's a lot you need to cover again? Is there a lot of material you need to go back and recap? Most of the time, no, because the SAT and ACT aren't fully knowledge-based exams. So a lot of it is just kind of practice, and you should be fine if you practice for it once. Practicing it for it again might not necessarily take as long. But if you feel like you're going to forget some of the material, like if you're going to forget completely how to do a lot of math concepts, you might want to take the tests closer to one another. People usually like to take the test closer to one another, though. That was one thing I realized when I was tutoring, was that sometimes they would schedule back-to-back like ACT or SAT tests, like, not back-to-back as in like a month apart. So after they got their score back, they would know immediately whether or not they wanted to go retake, which is something I don't highly recommend, because if you got a score that you're not happy with, you want time to study in between, and you don't necessarily want to take the test immediately after. So give yourself enough time to, recover and figure out what your weaknesses were again, and then be able to study again. But yeah, don't recommend back-to-back testing time dates, but I think maybe like 1 or 2 months in between each of your test dates should be fine if you are trying to get them done. You're welcome. Okay. Once you identify your weaknesses, should you go over the topic or take more practice questions on the topic? Okay, that's a great question. So first off, if you've identified your weakness and it happens to be a specific topic, the one that always comes to mind for me is matrices, because the ACT had those back when I was taking them and I hated them. So what I would recommend is, if you know exactly what it is, like if it's a specific concept, just search up practice questions. I can't even remember how many I did. I probably did like hundreds of matrices practice questions, and they were still confusing to me. But thankfully, there was no matrix related question on my actual test day. But just search up, I think, practice questions. But if you realize you don't even have an understanding of that concept to begin with, maybe watch videos. I think YouTube is such an underrated resource. You can literally search up any topic and get thousands of great videos out there with great explanations and great walkthroughs of each of these topics. So just search up. I think the most easy thing to search up would be like math-based concepts. But if you're struggling with like a math topic, just search it up on YouTube, watch the video, and then do practice questions. But highly recommend doing the practice questions, though, to figure out if you actually understood the material. Don't just watch the video and be like, okay, I understand it now. Make sure to test yourself on it. So usually what I would do is, when I take that practice exam on, say, like Saturday, Sunday, I would review the material, figure out what the weaknesses are. And the following week entirely, I would usually focus my time and energy on those specific topics. So that'd be watching videos, taking those practice questions. And if I could, maybe like the following Saturday or Sunday, do another practice test, or possibly even just do a bulk of like practice questions on that specific topic to see if I really did understand it. But this goes back to the Excel spreadsheet I was talking about. I would document all of this in the Excel spreadsheet and be like, okay, matrix related questions. I got like, 80% like the first time I did it, but like the next day I got like a 90%, 15, like, I don't know, 18 out of 20 questions, right? Just document that to see, do you actually have a good understanding of it like over time? But yeah, go over the topic first and then come back to practice questions, but make sure to do those practice questions. I think it's a little harder for like the reading sections. I think science, it's kind of straightforward. I think science is more that research analysis like skill. So I think there isn't a way you can really practice that, like, by reading, like searching up a specific topic, because those topics aren't usually repeated from test to test. Like not all tests are going to cover like DNA or proteins or something like that. The topics do vary significantly. So don't feel like you need to actually understand like, AP biology or AP chemistry to do well in the science section. But just get familiar with like reading graphs and like understanding what and dissecting what an experiment is asking you and what all that information is, what part of all that information is actually relevant to answering those questions. I think that just takes a lot of practice, but I think the best way to do that for the science section would be to actually do practice questions, then study like a specific topic. Yeah. I see a question about, I'm having a hard time studying for the reading section. Any tips regarding that? That's a really good question. I really struggled with the reading section too. I think so first of all, it depends on what you struggle with. But for me, when I was studying for it, what I really struggled with was getting through the whole reading, like reading the whole passage in the amount of time I had, and then still being able to get to all the questions. Because when I was getting to the questions, I was like, oh, wait, I don't think I fully understood the passage. So I'd go back to the passage, reread it, and I always lost a lot of time like that. So if that happens to be your same issue, one thing that I've recommended to a lot of my students in the past is read through the questions first. And this doesn't work for everyone, but it worked really well for me, is to read through the questions. And then I underline, you don't get a highlighter on the test, but like underline any buzzwords that you see. So if there is like a specific name mentioned, or if there is like, if it says like line 32, in line 32, what does this word mean, or something like that. Any of those like specific things that like seem to reference a part of the passage, just underline them and keep them in the back of your head. So read through those questions first, underline, kind of have those thoughts or those words, things lingering in the back of your head as you're reading through. And then when you're reading that passage, it'll come to you. You'll be like, oh, wait, there's a question about line 32. Let me like pay a little more attention here. Or there was a question about, I don't know, the doctor, and question 13 asked about the doctor. The doctor is mentioned in this specific paragraph. Maybe I should pay a little more attention here. So I think that helped me with figuring out where I should actually be paying attention in the whole passage, because there are parts of the passage, and this goes for the science section as well, there are like details of these passages that are not super relevant to answering the questions. So if you focus too much of your time trying to understand them while reading through the passage, you might find that you waste a lot of time, because at the end of the day, they might not be helpful when it actually comes around to answering those questions. You'll be like, oh, that wasn't even asked about. So the same goes for the science section. Some of those details, they include a lot of details on the science section for the ACT that are not completely important. So read through the questions first, possibly, and figure out what you actually need to focus on. And then, completely neglect the other details and be like, okay, they're not important at the moment, or at all, maybe, to answer those questions, because some details are not relevant. So that's my tip for you. Another tip would be, if you're struggling with the reading section, if, maybe you're struggling with like vocab, maybe you, like I said, Quizlet is helpful. Maybe you just need to make a lot of vocab flashcards for yourself, or maybe find pre-made flashcard decks on Quizlet, because I remember vocab is the thing a lot of students struggle with. But I think the biggest thing for reading and science for the ACT and reading for the SAT would be time management. So read the material quickly. Don't focus too much on like the superfluous details, and then just focus on what the questions are asking. I hope that answered your question. Okay, I have another question about, I plan on taking the ACT in December as a senior, so I only have 2 months to prepare for the exam. Okay, what would be the most time-effective way to study, practice questions, practice tests, etc.? So you've got the summer, which is helpful. You have 2 months. If you don't have anything else going on this summer, well, first, figure out where your baseline score is, and then figure out what score you're aiming for and how much realistically you think you'll be able to accomplish. So, most time-effective way to study would be, first, figure out if well, okay, how do I put this? So first, if you've already studied for the ACT or SAT before, maybe you already have a good foundational understanding of like the material. So then the rest of the time, you know, now when you're actually studying for these 2 months, you can focus solely on like practice tests and practice questions instead of like reviewing the actual content. Now, if you don't have any SAT or ACT studying going into this, that's also okay. But you might want to start with like a test prep book or Khan Academy, which has like a breakdown of all the topics you'll need to know. Or Khan Academy doesn't have ACT, sorry. So some ACT prep book and go through the specific chapters and at least like glance through them. I mean like some chapters in like the English section on the ACT will be about like grammar and punctuation. And these things are things you might already be really familiar with and are probably maybe already a pro at. So you might just want to glance through these sections, but focus maybe more of your time and energy on like a specific section in the science, specific chapter in the science section and the prep book. So just figure out, you know, do that actual test prep, like reading the material. And then after that, I would say, since you only have 2 months, maybe only spend like 2-ish weeks, maybe less if you can, on that actual test prep. So like that, reading that material, the content in the book, and then dive into practice questions. And, you know, as you do those practice questions and those practice tests, maybe you'll realize, oh, okay, maybe I should go revisit this chapter in the book. And that's okay. You know, you can go back and revisit the material, but you obviously don't want to be too caught up in all that material, because the actual practice tests and questions are going to be what get you to your goal score faster, because you want to figure out what you're actually struggling with. So since you only have 2 months, I would say focus the bulk of the time on practice questions and practice tests every week at least. Since it's only 2 months and there would be, I guess that would mean like 8 practice tests if you take one each weekend, I would say maybe you might want to take a little more than that. I would aim for like 10 practice tests. I know like the ACT book, the official one, has I think 6, and you should be able to find a couple of third-party ones for free online that will be maybe like a couple more. So you should be able to get to 10. I think take 10 practice tests, and then throughout that, in between each of those practice tests, integrate like, you know, practice questions depending on what your weaknesses are. But 2 months is a good amount of time to be able to study for it, since you'll be doing nothing else during the summer, hopefully. But yeah, I think don't focus too much on the content. Focus on it a little bit just to get like a brief, like a overview understanding of it, but dive into questions pretty quickly because your test date is pretty close.